As most of you probably know at this point, I like to make videos like this from time to time where we just kind of sit down and talk about games. And today I decided that I wanted to start a new series where we kind of go through and look at different consoles libraries and look at certain games where I feel like they're just underrated or overshadowed or just don't get enough love in general. Now before we get into this, I just want to clarify, I don't think that these are the most underrated games on the PS2, for example. I just think that these are like 5 underrated games. So I could totally follow this video up in the future with like 5 more games that I feel like deserve more attention or more love, if you catch my drift. And I definitely want to expand and cover other platforms at some point, like 5 Xbox 360 games that I feel are underrated, or 5 SNES games that are underrated, for example. And for the most part, I'm going to be trying to sticking to games that I know I have in my collection so I can actually show off the physical copies to you guys, because, I don't know, that's just how I am. And one last thing before we get into this, I know this intro has been dragged out for way too long, but some of these games you're going to see are from some more popular franchises, and you may be wondering, like, how is that underrated? It's such a popular IP, but I'll explain it as we go. And one very prominent example of this is actually our first game, Crash Twinsanity. So again, you may be looking at this like, how is this game underrated? It's a part of one of the most popular franchises of all time, that being Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot is obviously a huge series dating back to the PS1 with Crash Bandicoot 1, 2, and 3, and then you had some of the spin-off games like the racing game and the Crash Party game. However, if you know anything about Crash Bandicoot, it's a series that definitely, how do I want to word this? It has quite the range when it comes to quality, so you know, you have like the top of the bar, you think like Crash Bandicoot 1, 2, and 3, and personally I'd put Crash Twinsanity at the top there as well. Then you have some other titles like Crash Tag Team Racing, Crash Boom Bang, for example, which some people would probably put, you know, a bit lower on that spectrum of Crash games. Personally, I still really enjoy those games, but I know there's a lot of Crash fans out there that definitely can't say the same. And Crash Twinsanity is one of those games where, compared to some of the other Crash games, it definitely gets more love compared to those not so liked Crash games. However, I feel like it definitely deserves way more love than it gets now, and I feel like it even deserves more love from like its developer and publisher. As most of you probably know at this point, Activision owns the Crash Bandicoot IP, so you know, if we could get a Crash Twinsanity remake or remaster, I would really appreciate that. Basically, to kind of give like a quick rundown of Crash Twinsanity without delving too deep into spoiler territory, it's a traditional Crash platformer, if I'm gonna be honest. However, the level structure is a lot different. So if you think back to like Crash Warp, for example, you had the Warp Room where you jump into different levels, you could choose between the different stages, and that was that. However, Crash Twinsanity, it's more of a story-driven, interconnected world. So as the story goes, you're taken to new locations, and inside of those locations, there's like mini hub worlds that you can interact with. It's kind of hard to explain, but it makes sense once you play it, and it may even sound bizarre as I'm sitting here trying to explain it, but each of these stages are basically like their own little hub worlds, but you're exploring these hub worlds, and the hub worlds drive the story forwards, and even after you finish up your business there, even after you finish up the story quest, for the most part, you'll be able to like go back, collect gems. However, that does lead to some complications. If you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about later on towards like the school section, for example, where if you happen to accidentally backtrack, you could actually end up repeating a certain part of the story, which I ended up doing on my first playthrough, and yeah, that was a little annoying to say the least, but I didn't mind because that level was actually pretty fun. There's also a lot of really clever nods in this game to previous entries, like when Cortex is like, the Wrath of Cortex didn't make as much money as we hoped it would. I don't want to talk about this game too much because this truly is a game that I feel like everybody should experience at some point, and hopefully we'll get a remake or remaster of it at some point down the line. But if you have a PS2 or an Xbox original, I highly recommend picking this game up. It is so much fun, and it's so good. It's personally one of my favorite Crash games. Call it nostalgia bias, but this may actually be my favorite Crash game. I know, I'm gonna be canceled by the community for saying that, but I genuinely love this game that much. Next up on our underrated PS2 games list, we have Burnout Dominator, easily the most underrated Burnout game. Again, this is one of those franchises where you're probably looking at it like, dude, honestly, that could apply to, like, the rest of the games here. Like, these are all from some pretty popular IPs and franchises. However, when I look at these games, I feel like these are the most overlooked, overshadowed, and underrated games of their series, if that makes sense. And this is definitely one of them. I remember when this game released back in 2007, and I was absolutely blown away by it. If you go and look up gameplay of this game, I mean, even to this day, I mean, sure, you know, it may be a little fuzzy because it's on a PS2, and obviously all of those games run at 480i. Some games do run at 480p, 1080p, but for the most part, a lot of games on there run between either like 480i, 480p, you get the point. But despite that, when you look at it on a fidelity level, like the graphics and textures themselves, it actually holds up really well. I honestly just love this game. Like, I have a lot of nostalgia for it. Oh my gosh, and the soundtrack in this game, it had like Avril Lavigne's song Girlfriend in multiple languages in the game. So every time that I hear that song now, I think of all the different versions because of this game. It had like the Spanish version and the Japanese version. One of my favorite aspects of this game was the way that it put an emphasis on reckless and dangerous driving. The game was pushing you to, you know, drive on the wrong side of the road, get those near misses, drift around corners, wreck into other enemies, take them out. Because the more that you took out those enemies and the more enemies that you knocked out and the more you drove dangerously, the more it would build up your boost meter. And then once you got your boost meter filled, it would change from being like the normal orange nitrous bar to being blue. And once it was blue, you had the potential to do more dangerous acts while you were boosting, which would then build up another gauge for you to get your nitrous bar instantly refilled as soon as this one would end. So say while your nitrous was blue, if you did like 50 near, it wasn't actually 50 near misses because that would be ridiculous. That's just the example rule. So say you get like 50 near misses and then you would build up a secondary gauge where as soon as your primary nitrous would run out, your next nitrous bar would be automatically filled up and you could just chain it infinitely and just blast past your opponents. It may sound a little broken, but I promise it wasn't because it actually took some skill to pull these things off. Not to mention, I really like the car selection in this game. Sure, it wasn't like the biggest car selection in the world. It wasn't no Forza Horizon by any means, but it had a lot of cool cars, you know. You had like your bog standard like Ford 70s looking Mustang. You had like your Dodge Chargers in here. And you had some classier sports cars as well. I mean, if you look at the back, you can see some of the selection here. You know, you got your sports cars as well as some like older school cars here at the top. This game also had a really good career mode that kind of forced you to utilize like every aspect of mechanic in the game. It was a lot of fun, and I highly recommend this game. If you ever see it on eBay, Macari, or you know, at like a local retro game store, please do yourself a favor and pick it up. It is worth every penny, and it will be worth every second that you play the game. It holds up so well. Next up on our underrated games list. Now, this one is going to be really shocking considering just how big this IP is, but that is the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Now, again, this is probably one where you're looking at it like, how is a SpongeBob game underrated? This series and franchise is huge, but trust me, when it comes to like the PS2 and GameCube era and everybody thinks SpongeBob game, they automatically go, oh, Battle for Bikini Bottom. You know, that was one of the most revolutionary platforms of all time. You know, it was such a good game. However, nobody ever talks about the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game, which was essentially a sequel to Battle for Bikini Bottom. Was it an actual canonical sequel? Not technically, but it's kind of like a spiritual successor to it. Obviously, it's a tie-in game with the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. However, it runs off of the exact same engine. Most of the models are the same. It basically just took everything from Battle for Bikini Bottom, but kind of refined it to a certain extent. You know, fixed up some of the animations, fixed up just the way that the game feels in general, and then it converted it into this new format. So rather than it being like Battle for Bikini Bottom, where it's almost like open world at times, or open level, or open hub, or whatever you want to call it, it's more level-based, kind of. However, some of these levels are more open in their structure. So rather than it being like Battle for Bikini Bottom where you have like multiple open hubs and mini open worlds almost to explore, it's kind of like open levels where it's like each of Battle for Bikini Bottom's levels, but it's on a smaller scale and you're able to explore these levels. It also has like collectibles and things that you can go for. In fact, the one collectible is actually necessary for in-game progression, and that is one knock against this game that I hear quite often, just how, you know, there's a lot of backtracking, there's a lot of repeating levels in order to get the collectibles that you need to move forward in the story. Personally, I don't mind it because it forces you to actually, like, get good at the game. Whereas, you know, on your first attempt going through some of these levels, especially the ones that I think, like the landslide racing levels where you're racing against the clock, you know, the first time you go through it, you could probably easily do it, no problem. However, if you want to get the collectibles, you're going to have to actually get good at these levels and master them. And it's not like half of the game is backtracking or anything like that. Like, if you're actually engaging with the levels and challenges as you go, sure, there's going to be a little bit of repeating there, but not as much as if, you know, you try to just blast through the game and then get to the end and Mindy goes, oh, ho, ho, I'm sorry, but you're gonna need these certain collectibles, go back and get them. And the game actually does a good job from the get-go, like, explaining this mechanic to you and explaining, like, hey, you're gonna need to master some of these levels. There's a fine line between forcing you to repeat content just to pad out the time and having it be annoying, and then forcing you to actually master and learn the game to a certain extent so then you can, you know, get the proper experience out of it. And that's what this game does. And again, this one isn't structured the exact same way as Battle for Bikini Bottom. It's more level-based, so then it has an easier time, you know, having like different locations so it can properly follow the events of the movie. That being said, I don't want to go on anymore. I don't want to spoil anything for you guys. So if you haven't played this game, or if you've been considering trying it, or if you just straight up haven't heard of it before, please do pick it up, especially if you enjoy Battle for Bikini Bottom, whether that be the original or Rehydrated or the Cosmic Shake that just released a little bit ago. If you liked any of those games, you owe it to yourself. Give this game a shot. Next up, oh my gosh, this is probably one of the most underrated movie tie-in games that I've ever seen, and that is Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. When you think about this era of gaming, you know, the original Xbox and the PS2 and all that, everybody's like, oh, Battlefront 1, Battlefront 2. But rarely does anybody talk about Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, or another game that I personally loved a ton back in the day, Star Wars Bounty Hunter, which we'll probably talk about that in a following episode of this series. But today, I seriously wanted to hone in on Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, because compared to any other Star Wars game, this one is easily the most underrated, the most overlooked, the most overshadowed, and it genuinely makes me sad. Movie tie-in games and tie-in games in general definitely have a bit of a so-so reputation, especially the ones that came out back, you know, during this generation. Personally, I've always really liked tie-in games. That's just, I don't know, that's how I am, okay? I like playing the Space Chimps tie-in game. I like the Monsters vs. Aliens tie-in game. I like the Finding Nemo, the Cars, the Ratatouille, the Shark Tales. Any of those tie-in games, I genuinely enjoy them. That being said, no surprise, I adore Star Wars Episode 3, so the best way I could explain this game, I mean, you've probably seen Star Wars Episode 3 at this point, right? So, you know, I'm still gonna try to filter out the spoilers just so I don't spoil anything too crazy for you guys, but all I'm gonna say is that it follows the events of the movie pretty closely and almost to a T. There is a few differences because this game was being made before the final script of the movie was finished, so you're gonna notice a few differences here and there, like, hey, that didn't happen in the movie, or hey, that's happening in a different way than it happened in the movie. So there's a few of those differences, but it's nothing too monumental, nothing that like changes the story to like a drastic extent. But basically, you're going through this game and think like, oh, I don't know, like Dante's Inferno or the original God of War. Like, yeah, it's one of those. It's almost like a hack and slash lightsaber game. And as you go through the levels, you know, you're picking up like your level up point things, and you're able to like level up your characters and get all sorts of new abilities and combos. Because rather than this just being like a mindless button mashy hack and slash, which if it was just that, I mean, I probably still would have included it in this video just because I'm a sucker for Star Wars, but this game takes it a step further, and there's like this whole in-depth combo system, and there's different combos you can unlock, and different abilities you can unlock, and different ways to combine different abilities and combos to like deal out as much damage as possible. And the enemies in this game are actually really smart, because if you try to hit them with the same combo time after time after time, they're gonna start blocking, they're gonna start adapting to it, which forces you to, you know, like switch up your strategy, try different combos, try different abilities, try different force tactics. Not to mention the fact that there's also like bonus missions in the game, which allows you to play like certain events from other movies. The first one that comes to my mind is you can actually like play through the Obi-Wan and Darth Vader fight from A New Hope. Oh, and there's also one cool little thing that I'm not gonna spoil, but let's just say that while the normal ending of this game does follow the movie to a T, once you beat the game, you unlock a fun little alternate ending Easter egg, and that's all I'm gonna say. It's definitely something that you should just experience for yourself. Don't even look up any videos of it. Go play this game first and experience it for yourself firsthand, because it is worth it. Not to mention the fact that in this game, you actually get to play through the legendary battle between Anakin and Obi-Wan. Sure, the LEGO games have also done that, and you've been able to play through it in those games, but like this, you know, it's more of a realistic adaptation, I guess, where it tries to be as close as possible to the movie, and I'm just gonna say, it absolutely nails it. Now, this last one is easily one of the most underrated, one of the most overshadowed, and one of the most overlooked games on the PS2. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this one, and that is The Godfather, the game. As you can see here, you know, I have like a fancy limited edition of it with like the cardboard sleeve and the nice case. This is actually like an alternate case because this is a limited edition of the game. I actually have two copies of this game. I have one copy that is just like the standard normal edition. Then I also have the limited edition, which, you know, comes with the game and the soundtrack and a bunch of like bonus stuff on the DVD. This is one of those games where I am hesitant to actually go in depth and talk about it, because I truthfully do believe that everybody should just experience it, because, you know, you've played the open world games, you've played Saints Row, you've played GTA, you've played Watch Dogs, etc., but this is unlike any other open world game I played. The only thing that I can think would come somewhat similar to it would be like Mafia 3, because it has some similar aspects in it. It's loosely based on the movie. You're gonna see a lot of the important events from the movie play out in this game. However, sometimes different characters will be in different places. Sometimes different characters will be delivering different bits of dialogue. Sometimes different characters will be involved in scenes that they weren't in before. Basically, the premise of the game is that you create like your own special character. Like, Like, you don't play as any specific character from the Godfather movie. You just create your own character from the start. You're a new character named Aldo, and you get to take part in and play through some of the most iconic moments in the Godfather movie, whilst also playing through like a bunch of new set pieces and moments that happen in the story that weren't actually there in the original movie. And one of this game's biggest claims to fame is the fact that you're able to gradually take over the entirety of New York City by extorting businesses and rackets. Basically, to sum it up in like the simplest way possible, you know, it's like your classic mafia story where you have all these different families at war. Your goal is to go and take out all of the other families, all of the dons, all of the businesses until you're like top dog and you're the only one left standing. And to do that, you gotta go take over businesses, take over rackets, take out the opposing families' warehouses, and you get to actually play through all of this. You get to go to every single individual store. You get to go inside. You get to blast the place up. You get to grab the owner and, you know, punch him around and try to get them to give in and give up their loyalty to the other families. And, you know, it may sound like that may be like something that could possibly get repetitive over time, like going through an entire state and taking over the state shop by shop. That must get boring, but no, it never gets boring. And also, this game has a sequel on the Xbox 360 and the PS3 and the PC. It released 3 years after this game in 2009 called The Godfather 2. And it basically just takes everything from this game and expands on it. So whether you play the original or Godfather 2, I highly recommend either one. I mean, if I'm gonna recommend any of them, I would definitely say go with this one first. Don't get me wrong, The Godfather 2 is absolutely amazing, and I love that game. However, like, I don't know if it's nostalgia or what, but it's just, this game holds such, like, a special place in my heart. So if you're gonna play either of them, please play this one first, and then if you enjoy this one, go play The Godfather 2, because then it'll make you enjoy and appreciate all of the additions and changes that were made to the mechanics there even more. Whereas if you go in blind, it might be a little hard for you to grasp, and you might not be able to appreciate it as much as if you would have played this one first. But anyway, those are just 5 underrated / overlooked / overshadowed PS2 games that I saw in my collection. I was like, man, these deserve some more love. So now I definitely want to hear from you guys down below. Have you heard of these games? Have you played these games? Do you like these games? Is there any other games that you feel are underrated or overshadowed? And if you want me to continue this series, please let me know, because I would be more than happy to do so. Like I said, I plan to branch out and, you know, cover other consoles and also, you know, revisit the PS2 in the future to cover more underrated gems on this console. If you guys would like to see that, then yeah, I would totally love to continue this series. But anyway, as always, a shout out to the patrons and channel members, comments, Telegram, Liberty Tab, Big Daddy, Manny, Chalupa, Source Rex, Ray, Zach, Bowler, Ray, De Webster, Lamas, Bianca, Spiritory, Passant, Milalasking, Pudim, Magic, Mason, Ranch, 15, Flemington 1, Aaron Reynolds, Unknown, and Christopher Huerta. Thank you guys for watching. Have an amazing day. Stay beautiful. I love you all. Peace.